Now, Dayo Israel is the Chief Executive of the Africa Diaspora Youth Forum. He is one of Africa's leading authorities on social enterprise and human development. He's an evangelist, and he says he has advised many of the world's leaders. And he joins us now to share his story. Thank you very much indeed for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me in your right
studio. You're only so young, and yet you've got a CV as long as my arm. How have you managed to pack all this into your very short life?
I think I started very early. I remember as far back as 8 years during the Abacha regime in Nigeria. I was already part of the pro-democracy group. I was part of the Ganifawa New 1 Million Man March in Nigeria. I started my charity NGO in Nigeria when I was about 9. At 12 or so, I was elected into the Children's Parliament in Nigeria. At 16, I had already led the Nigerian children delegation to Onga. I got back to the UN General Assembly Session on Children in New York. I got back to Nigeria. I was appointed by the President as the chairman of the Presidential Summit of Nigerian Children. This was in 2002. And from there on and on.
I'm exhausted.
Absolutely dizzying. Yeah. So much packed in.
Absolutely.
And I just wonder, what has motivated you to do that? Because you've had your fair share of tragedy in your life.
Absolutely.
Your father died when you were 11.
Absolutely.
You were living in a slum in Lagos,
Absolutely.
working with your mother, selling shoes and African wares.
You seem to know a lot about me,
I
right?
do. I've done my research. and what was it that sort of got that little boy out of that situation?
I think it was just a passion for development. I grew up in a very average area. My father was a senior military officer in Nigeria at that time, but I was, African families, you have a lot of polygamy and all that. So I was raised by my grandmother. I lived around my mother and my grandmother in a slum in Lagos. So I used to sell zobo, some drinks when I was growing up. But sitting in there, I knew that people deserved better, and that was what inspired me. I got to UNICEF. I got involved in pro-democracy activism, and they said, no, rather than just fighting for human rights, you can actually be promoting children's rights. So I started child rights clubs in school in Lagos State, which has led to a lot of work that I now do now in helping to strengthen governance in Africa. I saw poverty, I saw inequality, and I realized that there was a need for social justice, and even from young people in my generation.
Now, children and young people are arguably Africa's greatest resource.
Asset.
How badly do you think they're treated?
I think that Africa is not nursing its strength a lot in terms of that. Over 70% of Africa's population is young people. Things are changing, things are rising. We see a lot of young people who are going into enterprise. We see young people who are innovating new ideas. They're creating product. For example, in Nigeria, we have Jumia, we have Konga, different online shops, online stores. Many of them are embracing entrepreneurship because government is failing. So people are taking the government and development into their own hand. But things are changing. But Africa needs to focus more on empowering its young generation and equipping them with skills and potentials. And if we do that and we can focus on that, there will be less insurgency. Look at all this bombing going on in Nigeria, for example. In Boko Haram, who are the people perpetrating? The young people who have no education, who have not been empowered, have not been given equal opportunity. But if we can empower and invest in our young people. In 2001, I was involved with Dr. Nelson Mandela in the Global Movement for Children campaign. We had 10 rallying points: protect the health for children, fight for every child, fight HIV/AIDS, fight poverty, invest in children. If we can fight poverty by investing in children and promoting livelihood among young people, we would have less war to fight, less violence to deal with, and less crime on the street of Africa.
You're obviously doing a lot of this sort of work through your charity. What's next for you? I wonder, do you want to become a politician yourself? You say that politics is failing, governance are failing.
For me, my passion is to help government to become effective. Our charity vision is an Africa in which everyone can achieve their potential, with government truly meeting the needs of their people. So on this trip, for example, I've come with a delegation of government leaders from Nigeria, and we're looking at how government leaders from Africa can work together, in particular in the Commonwealth. So Britain is the head of the Commonwealth. We celebrate the Commonwealth every year, but the real truth about it is how our Commonwealth nations, especially those from Africa, supporting each other in the name of equal prosperity. The Queen was talking this year at the Commonwealth Day about shared values, but it's beyond shared values, also shared prosperity. For example, in our airport in London, we should have a Commonwealth line, not just the EU and other passports.
Indeed. Now, there's an election coming up in Nigeria. If you were called in to advise whoever wins the election on March the 28th, what would you tell him? What would you be saying is their first priority?
I have had the privilege of speaking to both candidates across both sides. I was with President Jonathan. I asked him a question. Mr. President, why now? Why did you wait until now before you begin to recover and we take all our towns back from Baga to all the other areas? I had spoken to you, Professor Yemi Osinbajo, who was also the Vice President for the opposition party. And I've expressed my thoughts to them, and I've told them that the best thing you must do is to first unite Nigeria. Nigeria is divided and been polarized by this election along along religious lines, along ethnic lines. The first priority must be to reunite Nigeria as one nation. After that, we can then begin to talk about development and growth. But right now, we don't trust each other anymore. You have people speaking against each other. If somebody comes to you and say change, stone them. And the other party, everybody's accusing each other. It's all divided by ethnic. And see, if we're not careful, we'll become a Rwanda. So we need to be very careful.
Dayo, thanks very much indeed for joining us.
Thank
we
you
wish
so
you
much.
well.
Thank you so much.